All right, today's question. What would happen if our whole community actually lived like we trusted God more than money? We're in Deuteronomy 15, and this chapter digs into something most of us get real uncomfortable about: money, debt, and generosity. And God tells Israel every seventh year, cancel the debts. That means if your neighbor owed you, you let it go. Think about how radical that is. A whole economy built on grace and not greed. Why? Because God has already shown them grace when He freed them from Egypt. They didn't earn freedom, God gave it. Now they're supposed to live that same grace out with one another. And then Moses goes on and says, there should be no poor among you because God has promised to bless the land. But then in verse 11, he also says, there's always going to be poor in the land. Now that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. It's a picture of human sin and God's generosity side by side. If Israel had trusted God fully and cared for each other with integrity, poverty could have been wiped out in their community. But because of sin, selfishness, and greed, there would always be need. Jesus even quotes this in Matthew 26 when he says, you'll always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me. The point, generosity is not optional for God's people. It's a way of life. Another nugget that most people miss, when an Israelite slave served 6 years, the master had to release him in the seventh year, but not just release him empty-handed. He was commanded to send him away loaded with blessings, flocks and grain and wine, so he could start fresh. Why? Because Israel knew what it was like to be slaves in Egypt, and God sent them out with treasures in the Exodus. Their redemption story was supposed to shape how they treated others. That's gospel logic right there. Christ redeemed us out of slavery to sin, not leaving us empty, but giving us every spiritual blessing. Now, because we've been set free, we're called to treat others with that same liberality. Moses even speaks about the bondservant who loved his master so much that he chose to stay. His ear was pierced as a sign of lifelong devotion. That little detail points us to Christ. Jesus became the true servant who said, I delight to do your will, O God. He bore the mark of obedience all the way to the cross, and now through him, we become willing servants, not out of bondage, but out of love. And don't skip the last section. The firstborn animals belonged to God. They couldn't be used for work or sheared for wool. They were set apart for sacrifice, reminding Israel that everything, flocks, fields, families, came from God and belonged to God. And that's a shadow pointing to the true firstborn, Jesus Christ, who was wholly devoted to God, set apart for sacrifice and given for us. So what's the big picture here? Deuteronomy 15 teaches us that God's people are marked by open hands, generous hearts, and servant lives. The world clutches tightly, but God's children give freely because they know their Father will provide. The gospel changes how we see money, people, and possessions. It makes us stewards and not owners. So keep reading your Bible and don't be dumb.